You're in an underground command center. It's 3 a.m. to US Air Force officers receive a red alert. On their screens, an artificial intelligence system indicates Russian missiles are on their way. The AI not only identified the attack but also recommended an immediate counterattack. But there's one detail. There was no human confirmation. The general in charge hesitates. 15 seconds, 10, 5, 0. Nothing happens. It was a false alarm, but for a few seconds, a machine almost started World War III. This happened in 2023, and almost no one knew. The question that remains now is brutal. How many seconds are left before we are wiped out by a code error? Artificial intelligence is being trained not just to suggest decisions, but to make them. Of attack, of destruction, of mass death. It's the kind of power we've sworn for decades never to hand over to even the most capable human. And now, we're about to place it in the hands of an algorithm. A code without heart, without empathy, without regret. Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when a learning system decides whether a missile should be launched or not? When a robot assesses whether a troop movement poses a threat or not? When the fate of millions can be decided in milliseconds, based on data no one has reviewed? What if one of those data points is wrong? What if it's a sensor failure, as has happened before? History has shown that human nuclear decisions also make mistakes. In 1983, Stanislav Petrov, a Soviet officer, received an alert. The United States had launched missiles against the Soviet Union. He was supposed, by protocol, to respond with a devastating strike. But something in him said, this isn't right. He held his finger. It was a false alarm, and he saved the world. Now imagine if it were an AI in his place. An AI that feels no doubt, that doesn't hesitate, that simply ... acts. This is the crossroads. We find ourselves at, on one side, the promise of faster, more precise, and safer machines. On the other, the threat of losing the last shred of humanity in the most dangerous decisions we can make. And worst of all, many of the governments deploying these systems don't tell the public that they're already operating. They don't warn that, in some cases, nuclear weapons already exist under automated supervision. Sounds like science fiction. It's not. In 2020, a report from the think tank RAND Corporation warned, automated nuclear command and control systems are already in advanced testing in powers such as the US, China, and Russia. In other words, the red button could be just a few clicks or mistakes away from a robot. And you know what's even scarier? That much of humanity doesn't even know this. We follow our routines, we work, we sleep, we dream, and all the while, algorithms are programmed, fed, and placed before the most destructive power ever created, nuclear annihilation. Perhaps the biggest mistake isn't trusting AI, it's allowing this debate to escape the public. Because if tomorrow a missile falls on a city, and we discover it was fired by an automated system, what good is regret later? This is the first truth you need to hear. Artificial intelligence is already being used in military systems with the power of mass destruction, and the next decision may no longer be made by humans. And now, do you still feel safe? It was 1958, inside Colorado's Cheyenne Mountain. Engineers wiped sweat from their brows as they switched on the SAGE system, an electronic colossus that occupied entire floors with panels glowing orange. There, the first computer-guided air defense was born. Radar detected, algorithm processed, officer pulled the trigger. But something changed in that armored cave for the first time. The order to counterattack could emerge from lines of code, not a beating heart. RAND memos warned, the operator has become supervisor. Thick cables snaked across the floor, reeking of ozone, while teleprinters spit out graphs that looked like the electrocardiograms of a skinless giant. Each luminous pulse was a rehearsal for the apocalypse, and almost no one outside knew it. The algorithmic divinity was silently born. Nearly 2 decades later, technological arrogance took its toll. In the early hours of November 9, 1979, sirens tore through the silence at NORAD. Monitors showed hundreds of Soviet missiles crossing the Atlantic. Presidents were on the phone, fighter jets were warming up, launch codes were being unlocked. 6 minutes later, someone realized a training tape had been loaded by mistake. Less than a year later, a 46-cent chip failed. And the nightmare returned at 3 a.m. to electronic mirages avoided by human intuition. Today, however, the Pentagon is allocating $1.7 trillion to nuclear modernization with AI, vowing that mistakes will not be repeated, promise, or new trap. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, fear was doubled. If an Allied attack vaporized Moscow, who would pull the trigger for revenge. The USSR created Perimeter Dead Hand for NATO. Activated in 1985, it monitors satellites, seismic sensors, barometers, and radiation dissipation. If nuclear explosions are detected and no one responds to the authentication codes, a messenger rocket takes off to relay the final order to all silos. ICBMs launch even if no general remains alive. Recent investigators confirm that Dead Hand was never shut down, it simply sleeps, ready to wake up when someone turns the crisis switch. Rumors speak of neural networks coupled to old Soviet relays, a hybrid that no one outside the general staff can audit. Fast forward to 2024, New RAND reports paint a disturbing picture. The United States, China, and Russia are injecting AI into every link in the nuclear chain, from orbital surveillance to trajectory calculations, from warhead logistics to real-time threat prediction. Hyperspectral satellites capture columns of heat, algorithms classify in milliseconds, and screens display probability of attack, 92%. In classified wargames, reinforced learning models decide which radars to shut down, which bases to armor, which cities to cross off the map. Humans merely validate. In 2025, RAND analysts warned, the speed of software is pushing politics out of the room. General John Hyten admitted that, in a hypersonic conflict, human decisions may be too slow to prevent the end, or to confirm it. March 2025, Chinese researchers announced a revolutionary feat, an AI system capable of distinguishing real warheads from decoys in flight by reading thermal signatures invisible to the human eye. Headlines touted the breakthrough as a step toward arms control, but analysts saw another layer. The greater the precision, the greater the temptation to launch at the first suspicious sign. Add the construction of hundreds of silos in Xinjiang and the debate over abandoning the no dogma, and we have an equation where milliseconds matter more than diplomacy. Officials talk about reducing the decision cycle, a euphemism for cutting the human off from the red wire. When the competition is measured in teraflops, hesitation becomes weakness. Amid this rush, diplomats are trying to stem the tide of paperwork. In 2023, the United States spearheaded a declaration on the responsible use of military AI, promising that the last word will be human. The text doesn't bind anyone. Russia and China were left out. No treaty explicitly prohibits algorithms from deciding on nuclear warheads. If the countdown begins, who can guarantee a new Stanislav Petrov to doubt? Algorithms don't doubt. They execute. If this dive has made you see the shadow behind the circuits, don't let this conversation die here. Subscribe to the channel, click the like button, activate the bell, and comment "I choose humanity." Your voice fuels this investigation, and shows that there are still people awake on this side of the screen. Arsenals are fatter, less patient. China alone has already stockpiled over 600 operational warheads and plans to have most of them on lightning-fast readiness by 2030, a stockpile that breathes to the rhythm of lines of code. No longer the pulse of commanders to keep up with such speed. The general staffs in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing connect their silos to neural networks that treat nuclear warnings like stock market transactions. Milliseconds are worth billions of lives. When the alert goes off, it's the AI that screams first, the general responds later. What if human reaction time is longer than the flight time of a hypersonic missile? The real answer today is simple: there's no time. But the cost of this invisible timer isn't revealed in briefings, it's revealed in blood off-screen. Lethal autonomous systems have already single-handedly decided who lived and who died in Libya, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Gaza. UN experts call these drones killer robots because they hunt targets without remorse. Legal experts fear the black hole of accountability that opens when the machine errs, and it does. 3 of us were born on the same day, 2 soldiers, 1 student. The algorithm mistook uniforms for thermal backpacks. What was left was a crater and a cold statement, operating within parameters. Whose parameters? But the tragedy doesn't stop with the rubble. A single regional nuclear exchange, simulated by the US National Academy of Sciences, would reduce global harvests by between 3% and 16%, plunge global fisheries into a collapse of up to 70%, and damage the invisible link that puts food on your plate. Hamburgers in New York, pita bread in Beirut, rice in Lagos, all depend on ships, fertilizers, debt, and relative peace. Breaking a link, burning port cities, or freezing the sky with soot would be like pulling a thread that unravels the entire economic fabric in hours, not years. And the human body, The report lists shrapnel wounds, thermal burns, and acute radiation, but warns that the real enemy may be the collective mind. Mass PTSD, panic, suicides, health service collapses, and exoduces that surpass any refugee crisis ever seen. Imagine millions crossing invisible borders because satellites decided to trade heat for war. Gas stations dry up, supermarkets become arenas, Twitter turns fear into financial speculation. The real virus is uncertainty. Meanwhile, military laboratories race to hide warheads with robotic decoys, fog machines that confuse enemy sensors and increase the pressure to fire at the first signal. The International Committee of the Red Cross warns, we are minutes away from delegating the final trigger to software that no one outside the secret rooms can audit. If the cascade of sensors errs, who will be judged? The outsourced programmer, the minister who signed the contract, or no one, because the blame lies with system failure. This is the now that no one promotes in the glossy smart defense commercials. Hunger begins in the algorithm. The exodus is born from a bug. Nuclear winter can be ordered by a poorly tested script. And tomorrow, in the next section, we'll push the lens to the future where every choice diplomacy, aggression, or sheer apathy can plunge us into an abyss that not even AI can calculate. The atomic clock of the future doesn't measure hours, it measures machine cycles. In RAND's latest simulation, AI-accelerated nuclear command systems reduced presidential time the window a leader takes before striking back from 15 minutes to less than 90 seconds. The report warns that when hyperspectral radars cross-reference data with reinforced learning algorithms, any shadow over a silo can look like a missile about to take off. In this environment, hesitation becomes synonymous with vulnerability, and the temptation to delegate the trigger to foolproof codes grows like mold in a damp basement. Experts call it a flash war. Two armies program defenses that respond in microseconds. A microanalysis fails. The opposing system interprets it as a threat, responds with amplified force, and the spiral explodes before any human can express doubt. Imagine algorithms dueling in silence, each adjusting targets in a cascade of loops that no general can pause until the flash announces, "We're too late." This is the fear described by legal experts at Penn CER and analysts at the Center for AI Safety, a clash between autonomous software capable of setting half the planet ablaze while people are still reading breaking news on their phones. If the abyss metaphor still seems remote, look at the hand that watches over our extinction. In January 2025, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists advanced the doomsday clock to 89 seconds. Until midnight, an absolute record driven by the toxic mix of military AI, new Chinese warheads, and the possible end of New START. SIPRI reinforced the siren in a study chronicling the multiplication of silos in Xinjiang and the reversal of the global disarmament trend. It's not just more gunpowder. It's gunpowder connected to sensors that never sleep, ready to fire before a contemporary Petrov can say calm. Diplomats are trying to stem the avalanche with voluntary agreements. The political declaration on the responsible military use of AI signed by 31 countries in London promises meaningful human oversight and an off-switch for out-of-control algorithms. Pretty on paper, harmless in practice. The document is non-binding, doesn't include Russia, and ignores the dormant dead hand. Even among the signatories, officials are already admitting that in a hypersonic conflict, consulting Congress or Parliament would be a luxury. With each passing day, the sham treaty competes with billion-dollar contracts that demand faster, not more ethical software. Now imagine a 2030 in which satellites deepfake troop movements, a hacker inserts a ghost pixel into an infrared feed, and the AI concludes, attack confirmed. Rockets take off. Civilians wake up under a sky that glows like a magnesium aurora. Whose author? The outsourced programmer, the commander who stamped the contract, the machine that only followed statistics. The Kargutu drones in Libya have already demonstrated that autonomous weapons can hunt targets without human command. Swap 6 kg explosives for 800 kiloton warheads, and doubt becomes a collective judgment. Perhaps there is a way out. True auditable treaties, physical circuit breakers, direct lines between rival capitals, perhaps, but each day of inaction adds a layer of risk that no antivirus can remove. We are one software error, one leaked password, one solar anomaly away from repeating 1989, from crossing the point of no return. In the next and final section, we will stare this precipice in the face. What choices are left to us, mere mortals? When our finger on the button is digital and doesn't tremble, hold your breath and come with me. It's still dawn in Seoul, Buenos Aires, and Nairobi. Before the first bus even accelerates, satellite constellations have already scanned millions of pixels for hostile signals. Neural networks filter radar noise, calculate trajectories, present annihilation scenarios in machine cycles. The SIPRI Institute has measured this decision compression. When artificial intelligence invades conventional sensors, the interval between detection and triggering shrinks from minutes to seconds, increasing the risk of human error worse, non-human error. In May 2025, delegations packed the marble halls of the UN begging for a treaty to tame so-called killer robots. Human Rights Watch warned of the loss of the right to life when human judgment disappears from the trigger. Meanwhile, Reuters counted more than 200 autonomous systems active in conflict zones. While the Convention on Conventional Weapons stumbles on diplomatic verbiage, the result, voluntary norms, compulsory financial pressure, and the countdown continues. Research from the Federation of American Scientists warns of automation bias. Operators rely too much on the algorithm, silencing the doubt that a Petrov would need to feel. Analysts from the Texas National Security Review point out that no future agreement will be able to verify every line of code hidden in adversarial silos, making any promise of human oversight an easy calling card to forge. The cold logic of the machine demands microseconds. Human ethics need breathing space, and the clock doesn't breathe. When the breach opens, the machine acts. The International Committee of the Red Cross documented in detail the attack by an autonomous drone on fleeing fighters in Libya. No human voice gave the final order. No heart trembled as the trigger was pulled. Investigators still debate whether the software recognized backpacks or thermal mirages. What is certain is that the ground was riddled, and the official response was limited to collateral damage within parameters. Whose parameters? Of a code that never cried. Despite global warnings, state reports point to irreversible damage if military AI advances unchecked. In California, a panel of experts recommends mandatory audits, reporting channels, and independent safety tests before any system gains lethal authority. The document echoes a dilemma that crosses borders. Innovating without governing could mean delegating the planet's survival to a black box that no one truly controls. So we come to the wound that never heals. Whether the next light in the sky is a test or the end, we may only find out when the notification can no longer be read. Today, satellites and servers whisper orders that may become irreversible in absolute silence. Tomorrow, a mistake of just a few bytes could decide who wakes up and who will never see the dawn. And you who heard every click of this countdown, can you sleep knowing that there are already weapons that single-handedly choose who lives or dies?